I think I'm saying that we struggle all our lives to answer it. That it's the struggle that is important. That's what helps us to define our place in the universe.
This is Beverly, Dr. Beverly, Dr. Beverly Crusher. Honest,
Forceful,
trusting,
brilliant,
strong.
and adventurous.
And this is Crusher Combo.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Crusher Combo, where we are crushing the conversation one episode at a time. I have a very special guest with me today who has an amazing resume from shows like Doom Patrol, The Rookie, Grey's Anatomy, and my absolute favorite of all time, Bones. And of course, you guys know her as Lieutenant Tavine from season 3 of Star Trek Picard. An absolute privilege to have Stephanie Czajkowski here today. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you were able to take your time with me today. Like I said a little bit backstage, I was very inspired by your talk with Tim, and I was like, I really got to get you on the show because, as I explained, Beverly Crusher represents a lot about Trek, and I think what you're doing right now also represents a lot about what Trek represents. So thank you for everything that you're doing with your time and just, being a voice for many different people and different topics. So
I mean, it's my pleasure. And also I'm really thankful to Trek to kind of have amplified my voice a little bit because, you can speak into, not that it makes it more important than anyone else's voice, because that's not it. It's just like a platform to find even more people who, you agree with and you can build community with, and community is what changes the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what Gene was trying to do, right? He wanted to have a better future. Yeah. And so I think that is what we're all trying to strive to do, is to do better.
Yeah.
I'm going to start off with this question because now when I saw you on FSF Podcast, so hi, Tim, you had mentioned your inspirations, which was the Brady Bunch.
Yes.
Olivia Newton-John with obviously.
Yeah.
And Carrie Fisher. Now, I really wanted to talk to you about Carrie for a moment because I am also a huge fan of Carrie Fisher. I grew up in Star Wars. I also loved how open she was about her mental health. And that was why she was a big inspiration for me. So what was it about Carrie, or in part her character as Leia, that truly inspired you?
I think it was the fact that growing up as a kid, because when I was growing up, we only looked at people through, and lots of people are fighting this right now, through the idea of what binary is. Like, you're a girl or you're a boy, you only do these things, right? Mm-hmm. And it was refreshing, specifically because my first, exposure to her was Star Wars, was to see a princess, but a princess who just had balls, was just like tough as shit,
Yeah.
And to that point, and then eventually you watch her ascend as you watch the movies, and even as a human, just being really open and brash. And when I saw her in other things afterwards, just being like, hell yeah, man, like a real broad who tells it like it is, which is I love that, and I think it was important, at least for me, to see, because that's kind of how I've always been. I think I've been very comfortable in my skin since a child, and I totally credit that to my mother and my father as well, but mostly my mother. But also coming into a world and coming in specifically deciding and really having a passion for film and television and theater, where even as we're telling story and we're trying to expand the worlds around us, for a very long time only showing, women or people who don't necessarily fit into the binary in the way that is traditionally been, proposed. Right. It was, I think, just something I took inspiration from, because it's taken a long time for me to find my place, like, in its own right, because I've known who I am, but also when you recognize how people are scripting and writing story, you also recognize that sometimes you don't fit into their story. And, when you realize that you don't fit into a lot of story because you are taller or bigger or present stronger or, are different, it it takes a minute to find where you fit in. And
Mhm.
for me, specifically in film and television, at first it was, anybody who held a gun. At first it was, cops and firefighters, but where I really kind of found my footing was in genre. It was, which also was something I always wanted to do. So it was, those two things coming together, but coming together, after I've been at this for a pretty long time was
Mhm.
really kind of like coming home,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and we had a lot of amazing characters. I was born in 85, so I was kind of born
Mhm.
into all this, but like we had
Yeah.
Ripley, we had Leia,
Yeah.
Marion Ravenwood. I mean,
Right. Right. I mean, that scene where
absolutely.
you walk in and she's just I used to work at a bar and
I was a
I did
bartender.
that to a dude once. He was just like, all right, well, I want to drink tequila. And I was like, want to buy me a shot? He's like, well, I get to pick what the shot is. I'm like, okay, what do you want? And I literally was just like, I laid down like 5 shots of tequila. I did not get sick. I was like, he got sick. He had to pay for it and he left. And I was like, I need pizza right now. Like, I was also in my 20s, so like you could do that.
That is
Totally.
awesome. Those are the days, right?
Yeah.
Which is why, it's funny because I did not know anything about Star Trek at that time. I was
Mhm.
big on Star Wars. Leia was my
Yes.
girl, right? And I didn't know anything about Star Trek until actually the only thing I knew about Star Trek was Kirk, Spock, and Bones, right? Like,
Right.
those were literally the only
Right.
things. My dad had a mug, a
Yeah.
heat sensitive mug where they just, energized, and that was it. That's all I
Love
knew
it.
about.
Get transported.
And yes, and I met my husband in college, and he was a huge TNG fan. I was like, Star Trek, that's not my thing.
Yeah.
18 years later, I finally watched The Next Generation, and here
And you
comes
were like,
Gates McFadden.
what? Yeah.
Yes, here comes Gates McFadden as Beverly Crusher. I'm like, I like her because
Yeah.
that's who she was. She took no crap. She was a single
Yes.
mom.
Yes.
She was a commander. She was running her own department. I was like, that was
Yeah.
actually a lot of women in my family.
Yeah.
That was representing someone that I was a single mom. My mom was a single mom of 3 kids. Like, that was what I remember. So it's always nice to see that represented.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's hard to imagine. I mean, Michelle Hurd's talked about this a lot, and just about the original series and Michelle
Mhm.
Michelle Nixon. Am I saying? Oh my God.
Michelle Nichols. Mhm.
Nichelle Nichols. I said Nixon. What? But it is hard to see. It is hard to imagine yourself somewhere if you haven't seen it before.
Right. That was the whole why Whoopi Goldberg wanted to be on The Next Generation. She
Yeah.
was like, Star Trek was my jam because of Nichelle Nichols. Like, she
Yeah.
paved the way for
Yeah.
so many. Now going back to your work, as I had mentioned earlier, here's a little here's your little slide here. So of course, like I said, like Doom Patrol, you were on Bones, Grey's Anatomy, Rookie, A Call to the Wild, and of course Star Trek Picard. This is literally, guys, a smidget of her work. So hit IMDb. You did okay. I never saw The Call of the Wild because it has there's animals, and I have this thing about watching movies and shows with animals. Did you work with Harrison in that movie?
I was in the same scene as Harrison. I did not work with him directly.
Okay.
He got a letter, but just not for me. Like, I gave a letter to someone else, and he got a letter from someone else, but it wasn't for me. But I did get to breathe it around, and I did get to breathe the air he was, he was in.
Okay. I mean, that's close enough.
He's a really cool guy. I gotta say, like, it was one of those things because I get weird about approaching, especially when I'm on set. Like, there's a lot of people I know who will be like, oh my God, can I take a picture with you? And I have a tendency to not do that because I feel like it puts me in a weird frame of mind where I psych myself out and turn myself into this thing that doesn't feel that I deserve to be there. So it makes me nervous. So, and I also don't want to be like, oh, I'm a fledgling fan, like, because I want to be like, well, I'm an actor too, and and not in a nerdy way, but like not in a way. But for me, I also am just like, if it comes up, we'll talk, but I'm not going to force a conversation or whatever. But there was a point where we were holding, and usually you'll go back to your trailer or whatever, and the way the set is they had a practical bar that they shot in. And so they used it for holding for myself, for the assistant postmaster, and for Kara and Omar Sy. And we were all just kind of hanging there. And then Terry, who played the dog, who was the dog, because it's all, CGI. And there was a dog they had, but he played the dog. And Harrison also, when he was there, he was in that, that holding as well. And there were extras who kind of wandered in there, but he was just super cool. Like anybody who talked to him, he was super cool. And I remember going, because I had to get shot from all these angles, because when they do CGI, they have to potentially like fix stuff afterwards or whatever. It's one of the
Right.
things that like became a big thing in our contract. And I was like, I've already done that. What does that mean? And they're like, oh yeah, they can't use that. Like the technology is too old. I'm like, okay, great. But I remember coming back and just seeing him like laying on packing blankets on the floor, just taking a nap. Just like super cool around, like not being like, I need to go to my trailer, blah, blah, blah. Just a really cool cat. Just a really cool cat.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've always heard great things about Harrison. And like I said earlier, I'm a huge fan of Bones. And it was so funny because, as I was reading your IMDb, I was like, oh my gosh, she was Helga Fisk in that episode. I was all like, heck yeah.
I was like, it's so funny because I went in, as you do when you try to find your place. Like you meet casting directors who like you and they call you back for stuff when they think that you're right for it. And sometimes you fit and sometimes you don't. But if, they just keep coming back, they keep calling you back because they want you to like fit you in. And that was one of those roles. I remember I got it and I was like, oh yeah. Like as opposed to having to do like a first audition, I went straight to producers. Like I went like, because I think they were like, oh, this is the one. Like this is the one. And it just was like, it was one of those things. And I'm like, yeah. And then I actually threw the axe. Like I threw the axe in the first scene. I'd never thrown an axe before. I used to play softball when I was a kid. And they showed me because they had flown in this lumberjack show. So in terms of being an extra, it was amazing because literally a bunch of extras got to come watch a lumberjack show. And you don't have lumberjack shows in California. So they had flown this lumberjack show in from like Minnesota, I think. And they had me, practicing throwing the axe, and I managed to do it. And I remember David Boreanaz coming up and being like, yeah, how long you been doing that? I'm like, about 20 minutes. About 20 minutes. That felt very cool. And one of the I think it was one of the PAs actually took a video of me like practicing and doing it. So I have like it is a skill-ish because I've gone to like axe throwing places and I've never been quite as good as I was on the day. But
it's amazing because like, did you ever think like one day I'm going to go on a show and I'm throwing an axe? Like that's really
hope. I mean, that is the best. That is my favorite part of this. One of my favorite parts is learn. Like I love stage combat. I went to theater school and they had stage combat, but they didn't have like stunts. Like, and you want to start stunts when you're young, when you're less afraid of like breaking something. Like you want to start that shit when you're like, I can do anything, as opposed to like, I am now in my 30s and you want me to jump off what?
Yeah.
But it's the most fun is to learn a new skill. And, that's one of my favorite things is learning new skills, being exposed to, a deeper look into a world that I knew about, but didn't know as much,
Yeah. I talked with John Billingsley back in July and he had done an episode of Bones and he just said it was a really cool set to be on.
Yeah.
Like everyone was nice.
Really
Everyone was cool. He said he didn't really get to work with a lot of the actors. He mostly worked with Emily because they had a scene together, but he was like, it was just a really nice. I was like, I could see that. My daughter grew up with the show. Like I was pregnant with her when I started it and she still watches the DVDs right now, like going to sleep. She's like watching, and I'm like, it sounds so weird, but that's just her comfort show.
No, it's like, it's comfort. It's like comfort food a little bit. Right.
Yeah.
Emily in particular. Yeah. Dave was great, but Emily was just very welcoming. And it's always weird to be like a guest on a show that's been going for a really long time.
Yeah.
Because you're stepping into someone's party, right? And you want to bring something. And there's a little more grace granted. It's funny because there's a little more grace granted when you have a bigger role. Or so it feels like, because it's like, and you get treated a little differently as opposed to like, I'm here with 3 lines and you're like, I just don't fuck it up. Like just get in and get out. Don't fuck it up. Don't take time because this is, whatever. But
now, was there anything in your acting career that any show you guested on or things like that you wish you can go back to as that character? Like you had such a great experience where you're like, I hope I could come back and do this again, or maybe continue with the story somehow. Like, where is Helga? What happened?
Yeah.
I mean, sad story. Just a spoiler alert, guys. The woman she fell in love with died, so that didn't end well for Helga.
She's off. She's broken up, from Gunther or whatever. He was so good. My friend Trevor, he was great. I think above and beyond, like my experience on Doom Patrol was so lovely, and it was such a lovely show. And I would love to see, I always wished that Hammerhead could come to the surface, and so I think it's kind of a tie, because I would love to see both Hammerhead do more, although they wrap that up so beautifully. And, I wish they would find a way to reconstitute Tavine, and go into Legacy. Because, I would love to see her. Some of my favorite work on Picard was, like, there was one scene where, Ed came in and pretended to shoot everybody. And it was the one scene that I was talking science babble, but it was to a human, like another person, like talking about how much I loved, like, isn't it fascinating? I could say fascinating. And I would like to explore more of who she was as a person, or as a Vulcan Deltan, combo.
I don't know if you've seen it on social media. I want to say if it's Letters for Legacy, maybe.
Oh yeah, I've seen it.
Where it's the twin sister of Tavine. We're like, bring it.
I mean, that's what he was like. Man, she got a twin sister. I'm like, yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah, sure.
I'm like,
if they're gonna be able, to
I had no hair. There's a lot of options. I'm like, I can Jeffrey Combs it. I could come back. I mean, I would love to play that character, or someone in that, someone from that family with that same mix would be interesting. But I'm also just like, you can stick some prosthetics on. I'd be happy. I would be happy to be the long lost, daughter of Worf, somehow related to Michael. I'd love that.
Hey, that's totally fine. Now, going back to Picard, was there anything about your experience about playing Lieutenant Tavine, or like, were you a Trek fan before you did Picard?
I was. I grew up mostly on Star Wars as well. Like when I was like, oh my God, I want to be Princess Leia. But my father had been a original series fan, and to my recollection, the first movie I saw in the theater was Star Trek the movie, which and then from then, my dad would watch the original series while doing his homework, because he did night school. He had a job and he did night school for college. And then he was a big TNG fan. My mom was a seamstress and costume maker. And when the Voyage Home came out, we did a balloon arch for a special premiere of something, where she had also made those Admiral jackets. Like, she used to make cosplay before cosplay was cool. So nice. It's been threaded. It has been threaded throughout my life. And I did not realize both of my parents are deceased. And so I did not realize to the depth, because whenever a new Star Trek movie come out, I'd go see it. It was part of my upbringing. But it wasn't something I necessarily sought out. So I did not prepare, I think, for how deeply I would be affected by walking onto that bridge. To just knowing how special it was, knowing how, my father had died. My father had passed away, I think 3 years in 2017. And just the idea of, oh my God, how amazing would it have been to be able to bring him to a premiere and introduce him to Michael Dorn? Because there's a long story about how I used to sell stuff on eBay, and we happened to, when he came out to visit me once, we found a used jacket that was his size, because he was 6'3" and 250 pounds. And it turned out that it was Michael Dorn's jacket. It used to be Michael Dorn's jacket. And nice jacket. It was a very nice jacket. And so he cleaned it, and he had retired, and he would go out on dates, Match.com in Vegas. And he would be he'd wear that jacket, because this is the man, his fashion sense was flame Hawaiian shirts and a lot of jorts and a lot of sweatpants.
There you go.
So this was his thing. It was an Armani, but it was Armani. It was Armani, and it was tan, and it was linen, and it was gorgeous. He wore that damn jacket, and every time he went out, he'd be like, "Do you know Michael Dorn, Worf from Star Trek? This is his jacket." And if I didn't know who Michael Dorn was, like that was like but he wore it everywhere. Enough so that when
Nice.
he passed away, there are a few items of his clothes we kept, and one of them was that jacket. So when you fast forward and I got to be on the show, I was like, and it turned out Michael was going to be on. Like eventually, I got to tell him the story. I told him the story at the premiere, and he was like, "You got a picture of that jacket?" I'm like, "I do." And he's like, "I showed him a picture." He's like, "I remember that jacket. I was a bigger guy then. That's a good jacket." I'm like, "Well." We got the stain out. It won't fit you now, but
That's fascinating. So you came full circle
yeah,
in
it was
so
a
many
full
ways.
circle. Yeah,
That's
it was
amazing.
very much a full circle. Like that like the experience of playing Tavine and how I built her, you know, a bit, how I built her and how I came up with and how Terry agreed to allow her to be slightly Deltan and like a little bit of Deltan, mostly Vulcan, with the bald head and everything. The
Mhm.
internals of that were very, very based as kind of in honor of both my parents. So
Oh,
it was,
nice.
yeah, it was just in its own little beautiful thing. It was kind of lovely.
Very nice. You're paying tribute to your
Yeah.
parents
Well,
in that way.
but then silent tribute, it's silent tribute because it's like, oh,
Mhm.
this is how I enter these characters, and oh, this reminds me of these people. Oh, I'm going to endow it with this, and this is, why, and I know how to pull from it, as it were.
Awesome. Love that story.
Yeah.
Now we're going to shift from your acting career onto your personal journey here. As many of you guys know, you have been a 3-time survivor of 3 different types of cancers: thyroid cancer, breast cancer, and renal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. No, not really.
I
Kidney. Yeah.
I cannot imagine being told all of this. Like, you were telling the story with Tim about when you were finding out that you had cancer, especially all those different ones.
Yeah, cancers.
How did you just like emotionally and even mentally get through that? Like,
I'm not
can
really
we
sure.
even put it in words?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I am made of, I think, a very sturdy stuff, which is both good and bad.
Mhm.
My mother my mother passed away of a very rare cancer. And so I witnessed her being a super healthy person who got diagnosed with a very rare blood cancer that had a life expectancy of like 12 months.
Mhm.
And then helping to, find the person who would treat her, and then watching her survive for another 7 years and then have it come back and blah, blah, blah. And for me, like, I think part of it is big loss doesn't condition you for hard things, but it, I hate that phrase, like, God never gives you more than you can handle. Like, shut up.
Tell me about it.
Tell me about it.
I'm always like, Lord, I'm not this strong. Like, please
Yeah.
stop.
I think I have been raised, and I am very good at compartmentalizing things. And that can be both good and bad, because I think people compartmentalize emotion. I think Americans do, in particular, which is why a lot of them are very angry or very hurt and don't know how to deal with their feelings, is because I can put something aside and then focus on something else and know that it's there. I think being an actor is really helpful in recognizing that you can hold a lot of things at the same time, but you don't necessarily need to. If you're holding something, it doesn't always need to live there, right? My biggest explanation of it is, and I think anybody who's heard those words, is I had gone through the year before a just year of just like bam, bam, of like losing people, of having people pass away, which I feel like as we get older happens more. I'm pretty good friends with my grandmother. She's got some dementia. She's 96, but there was a point in my life where I was like, we talked to her and she's like, everybody's dying. And I felt like that came a lot earlier for me than it came for other people. But in 2017, it was like my dad, my uncle, one of my good friends from college. And then 6 months later, I got my first cancer diagnosis. And the first one was the thyroid. And they were like, oh, it's not a big deal. And so I ignored it. And it wasn't until I got into the surgeon's office who was like, oh yeah, you have thyroid cancer and it's kind of spread. And I was like, oh, what? Because when you're hearing something like that, you kind of freeze a little bit. Like, you hear it and you're like, yeah. but you don't necessarily process. And I think the human
Right.
brain just freezes on things and puts them to the side until it can process again. So for me, that first cancer was like, oh my God, like I sat with it and was like, oh God, if I die, if they cut my throat, the idea of, specifically for me, I sing, but I don't sing as much as I used to. Like I wanted to be a musical theater singer or performer and ended up doing more film and TV. So that's not something I've done in a while, but I sing to myself, and the idea of not being able to do that was terrifying. So that first cancer, which was, technically they're like, it's an easy cancer. Everybody has it. It's not a big deal. I really sat with, I think, post these deaths in a way that was like, okay, what if I die? Like, what it would, I don't want to, I'm not ready to do it. But it's a possibility. It's always a possibility. So
Right.
if that happened, where am I in my life? What kind of person? Like, it was like a taking stock, really, which I think helped, because I think what we tend to do as humans is we're scared. I mean, we're scared of hard things, but we don't want to think about death. And we certainly don't want to think about our own death. But there is some, for me, and this might not be for everybody, I don't know, like this is just the way I did it. There is something in sitting down and being like, okay, let's really take stock of where I am in my life, even though it's not over. And if it is over, am I okay with that? Or not okay with that, but am I happy doing what I'm doing? Am I happy where I am? Am I like, how do I feel about everything in my life this far? And I was really fortunate that, well, there's much more that I want to do and things that I want to see. I was like, you know what? I've tried to do, like, and I would have done it different, and there's regrets somewhere, but overall I am okay with the human I am and what I've done. And like, I don't have any super, super big regrets, because what's the point? But also my life is pretty fucking good and I'm pretty fucking lucky, and if the universe decides that it's time, then I only have as much time as I have. So like, I went through that before I found out I had breast cancer. So I did all that. And then the day that I was going back 2 weeks later, and maybe it's because instinctually I knew, 2 weeks later, I went back in. I was like, I found the lump before I went in for the thyroid surgery. 2 weeks later, I went in for my follow-up, found out I had breast cancer that day in the office. And it was this weird, like, Grey's Anatomy, like, see this doctor, go, 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 go. And like, which does not happen, which is not how that works. Usually
Right.
find out, and then you have to go see a doctor and get a referral. And it just happened to be that because I go to UCLA, this is so long, I'm so sorry. I went to see the endocrinologist, surgeon, who sees all my charts. And I walk in and she's like, what the fuck? And I'm like, I am right. And she's like, all right, so what? And I'm like, I don't know. She's like, so here's the deal. She's like, we'll get to your follow-up, but I share office hours with the senior surgeon for the breast cancer, for the Revlon Breast Cancer Center. Can you hang out? If you hang out, we can see if we can fit you in. So it was this woman who was a doctor, who knew I already had a cancer, who had already treated me for cancer, basically was like, all right. And we just hung out. I was like, I'm not going anywhere, because I'd already moved this appointment earlier, had my primary care ready to go so that we could do the whole transition process. But I jumped that. So I ended up seeing the cancer doctor like an hour or two later, who looked at my stuff and was like, this lovely Asian woman who was like, you have an old lady's cancer in a young lady's body. And I was like, awesome. I was like, well, I've always felt like it was semi-aggressive, and it was the type it was, because, breast cancer has all these little things that make it really specific. Right. And then she was like, well, I'd like to do, it was in one breast. I want to do a mastectomy with reconstruction. So I'd like you to meet the plastic surgeon. And I'm like, great. Okay, we'll do that. And I'm thinking I'm going to get, an appointment to go. 15 minutes later, that dude rolls in and is like, all right, like, poking me. My husband is like looking at me, lifting up my boobs. Like, is there enough? Like, poking my stomach. The nicest thing I heard was I wasn't heavy enough. I didn't have enough fat to reconstruct a breast. I was like, oh, that's nice. And by the end of this all, I leave and we still have to go see my primary care. And I call her and I say, hey, I've just done all this other stuff. Do I still need to come see you? And she's like, yes, you need to come see me. Because she's a really good doctor. And I went to see her and she's like, how are you emotionally? She's like, do you need Xanax? Like, do you need some sort of medication just for anxiety? And I'm like, I think I'm okay. And she's like, we're just going to give you something just in case. I'm like, okay.
Just in case. Yeah.
And so
because it might hit you all of a sudden.
We did that. And then we went to a bar because I was like, and, and then it was 6 weeks later and it just kept being more things and more things. We're like, okay, we do this and we do. And you get into the race. It's like a Spartan race a little bit, right? You get in, they tell you the things you got to do, and you just focus on doing the things. And you don't really think about you don't really have time-ish, I don't think, to think about all the things you go through until the end. And that's what they never tell you is you end up dealing with it. You're not dealing with it in the moment. You deal with it. It hits you a little bit later and it hits you when it's all over. It's like, I always talk to people who, if they lose somebody, if they have a big loss, like a family member, a really close friend or a mom or dad, that the shock is awful. The process of doing a memorial service is awful. But the worst part of loss when that happens is right after that's all over and you go into the first day of your life and recognize where that hole is. And for cancer, it's the same thing, kind of. You don't really realize until later. And I think, and it's weird because you just think, oh, it's over and I should be over it. But I think instinctually your psyche kind of protects you from it until it can start to seep in. And I think for me in particular, I posted this video or a picture when all of my surgeries were done after we found the kidney cancer. And it was just like, maybe a year later or that I could say like I was actually cancer free, at least for the moment, that I had a picture and just listed all the surgeries and it was a picture I had taken of my naked body, which I, covered up, and I saw it and I read it and I started crying, but not because it was me, because I was able to step outside and look and just have such compassion for this human who was me. Like you kind of step outside yourself a little bit, you know, you really kind of step outside yourself a little bit.
You took a step back and just saw what you just went through. Because like you said, you're in the moment that you're not realizing all that you're going through at that time until finally it's over and you're like, oh my gosh, I just did.
Yeah. Or the ramifications or, and also we say it's like separate of we say this personal journey, like this health journey is separate of my, acting career. But I got diagnosed and a week later I booked Call of the Wild. I waited till the end of I went to work on Call of the Wild. They managed to, I was like, oh God, when am I shooting? Because I had surgery and I had 8 weeks and it turned out to be the 8th week. Like there was this synchronicity that kind of crept in a way that also balanced this stuff in a really weird way. Cause suddenly, and I think a little bit it's because, suddenly my career was like flying because not that I didn't care, but it wasn't so precious. And I was like, well, if I get a job, great. But I have to worry about staying, like, this is what I need. This is the main focus. And I'm going to put in if they want me, they want me. And if they don't, they don't. And, I did the Call of the Wild. My hair started falling out. I did chemo right after Call of the Wild because my college said, we'll do it. We could do it in the middle. I'm like, I am not starting chemo in the middle of the biggest film I've met. Like, I'm just not doing that.
Right.
I don't know how I'm going to react. So he let me wait. So I wrapped on a Friday, started on a Monday. 2 weeks later, my hair started falling out. So I was like, well, screw it. I'll shave my head. I watched my mom lose her hair. She laughed it off and wore wigs and did all this crazy stuff. And I was like, all right, fine. Turned out I really liked myself bald. Got some headshots. I was like, let's get headshots. And book Doom Patrol, and then like, so then it was like me, Bald, the industry love. Like it was this weird. It was this like the universe being like, you've had some really hard. We're gonna give you a little bit of a reward here.
Yeah, exactly. Here you go.
know?
My
You know?
my aunt, she like cancer has affected everybody, right? We
Yeah.
don't know not one person who hasn't been
Yeah.
affected by cancer. Weird thing though, is I was thinking in my family, the women in my family have survived cancer, and the men in my family did not. I was like, that's I don't know if that
Yeah.
it's I know it's a little weird, but my aunt currently, she had breast cancer years ago, and but it was like stage 1, so she was able to take care of it good,
Yeah.
out the door. Now she's fighting thyroid cancer. So,
They
it's
haven't made an official link, but I swear to God, they're linked. Like I swear to
right.
God.
I mean, they're pretty close. Like I
Yeah.
could see where or lymphoma,
Yeah.
So yeah, she's dealing with that, and we're just like, okay, let's do it. Let's figure
Yep.
it out, until, like you said, it's probably like, if so far she's doing well, but and if we're able to say like she's cancer free, we're gonna be outside that box and be like, whoa, we just witnessed this. We just went through this. I remember you posting on social media. You were saying to be kind because you never know who needs it.
Yeah.
Right. And I had messaged you, and I was like, boy, do I got a story for you. And this actually fits really well with what you were just talking about being outside that box and, looking in. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge mental health activist. Like we need a lot of help in this world when it comes to that. Absolutely. And since I was a kid, I've suffered from anxiety and suicidal depression. That's always been my thing. Always did the medications, always saw the doctors, did everything that I was supposed to do. Right. Well, as I got into Trek, this being a different kind of fandom that I'm used to, right? That was like, oh, people actually like each other here, and we're unity. And there's also learning about hope for a better future and being kind and compassionate, just like Beverly Crusher is with her patients, and how Picard is very, about helping other worlds. And that's just how the show is.
Yeah.
Well, I started 2022 on to 2023. I'm a housekeeping manager. I had to do a wellness check on a guest. And my story is that I walked in on her suicide attempt.
Oh my.
So I had to jump in and start first aid, make sure she was awake, and this girl was just so desperate to end her life that she was fighting me on it. And I don't know who this girl was. I've never met her in the day of my life, but I was like, no, I'm going to save you. I'm not leaving. She was so desperate to the point that she actually, I didn't even realize this, but she still had the knife with her in the tub. And I was the only one with her. I had my other 2 employees outside the room as they were calling 911. She slit her throat, like right in front of me. And I remember grabbing the knife and I threw it. And that's when the adrenaline kicked in, because like, this is happening. Like, right, like this is what is going on. And I'm starting to stop the bleeding, and I pull her out of the tub and everything like that. And she was I was fighting this girl for her own life, because she even grabbed a champagne bottle and tried to choke on it. Like she just wanted to die. And I was fighting her so hard. And all of a sudden she looks at me and she's crying, and she's like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? She's like, just let me die. And it was just instinctual, because I was like, because I want to show you what kindness actually looks like. Like that's literally what I told her. And then I start crying and she's crying. And there's this whole thing. And I'm a whole like blood all over me. Like I'm trying to, and I saved her life. We got to her to the hospital in time. I don't know where she's at. I don't know what, if she's still doing okay. But that was a moment like that changed my life.
I'm like, yeah. I was like, geez. I'm like, how? I'm like, oh,
it was one of those things where, and God bless my work, because they gave me the time off that I needed. I was off work for 2 months, and I was in very like serious therapy for 15 months. And it was one of those things where, therapy's tricky, right? You go in to do the PTSD and the trauma and all that. And somehow all of a sudden, like, well, this happened in my childhood. And so you're going back. But then it was talking about my suicide attempt when I was 13. And I tried the same way she did. And I was like, whoa, full circle.
Oh, that
right?
gives me
Because
chills. That
yeah,
gives
I
me
was
weird
like,
chills.
it was just like I survived my attempt at 13, and here I am at 38. I was 37 at the time, saving another young girl's life who tried to attempt the same way. I don't know, and it's like we all have a story.
Mhm.
We all don't know who anyone's going through. So we have to just always be kind. Like that was
Yeah.
my instinct. I was kind to a stranger and I saved her life, and it changed me in a way where I'm just like, okay, Star Trek, here we go. So I'm like doing the podcast and I'm just like, this is what it's about. We're supposed to be there for each other, right?
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things, like you're doing the same thing because you got hit on all corners and you kind of paved your way, especially with your Trek journey being on Picard, to, be a voice for those, right? To just be like, I have a friend, her name's Paula. She is a huge fan of yours. And she just wanted to say thank you. And she appreciates you for motivating women to screen and be proactive.
Oh,
Right.
mm,
Because, just you going through all that, you're like, hey, this could happen to anyone. Just, just do it. Don't be
yeah.
afraid.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that was also kind of my story of where I was telling people, I was like, just be kind because you just don't know what's going to happen. You just don't know what that next, they're smiling means nothing,
Yeah.
right? You don't know what's inside. And like I said, I actually even said, I was like, I saw evil in the face. Like I was fighting evil for this girl's soul. Like that's how it felt.
Yeah.
It wasn't until after where it hit me where I, outside that box where I was like, I just went through that and I don't
Yeah.
know how to process this, right?
Yeah.
Even my husband and my daughter, they were just like, we don't know how to help you. I was like, I don't know how to help me either. Like,
That's what
it's okay.
happens here.
Yeah. So it's interesting how you were saying that. I was thinking about my journey, right? And a
Yeah.
little different, but
I
we all
mean,
have the kind of the same
I'm
goal.
just like, geez. Well, I, you say that, and I'm like, first of all, thank you. I'm like,
I
there's,
mean,
I mean, we don't think about what we can walk into and where and how we react in situations like that, right? The adrenaline
right,
kicks in, and is it, fight or flight, or they always say
right.
fight or flight, and with women they always say like tend and care, or like I mean,
Hmm.
or there's another thing that's beyond fight or flight or whatever,
Right.
but also thank you for thank you. If she didn't say thank you, and I mean, because she did her thing, but thank you for making yourself vulnerable enough to do that and to share that. And also, the other thing that when you were saying, you're like, oh, when I was 13, I'm like, what a bizarre kind of full circle-y, like, I mean, it almost, almost as if it was put in your path to save yourself because, you know, but not, I mean, not, it theoretically,
I
you know
get
what I
it.
mean?
I get it
Yeah,
because like
theoretically.
I was I was able to save myself in that situation because I always told people, they're like, "Well, how did you survive your attempt?" And I was like, "I don't know because no one knew I attempted." It was so weird because I remember I was beginning to slip my wrist, but then somehow I was like in my room and I
Right.
had marks on my hand, but I was like, okay, right? But I
Right.
don't know how I got from A to B. And so, I mean, I have a huge faith with God and things like that. So I
Yeah.
always like to hang on to that. Like I was like, God did something. Like He transported me
Yeah.
over
He was
there.
just like,
Um,
"We're gonna shut that part of your brain down. We're jumping in, and your better angel,
exact-
one of your guardian
yeah,
angels is jumping
just
in and being
wiped it
like,
out.
I'm taking over for a little while.
Just
This
for a
part of your brain
second.
needs a break." Yeah.
Yeah. But the fact that, because like suicidal depression doesn't ever go away. You just have to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
You just have to figure it out and how to live with it,
Mhm.
however that is, whether it is medication, therapy, however you need to do. My husband has bipolar disorder. So, we figure that out and how
Yeah.
his treatment is. But to walk in and see that and just be like, I'm on the other end of it, you
Yeah.
know, um, was very eye opening for me, and it
Right.
just kind of changed my perspective on a lot of things,
Mhm.
and just also about how everyone is going through something, like every
Yeah.
single person.
Yeah.
So, but I was always one to jump in and help people. Car accidents, I'm out there pulling them out of the car. Like I've done that before. But to get a call from the CEO and he's like, I don't think I could have ever have done that. He's like, you were the right person at the right time.
Yeah.
And I was all like, I didn't want to be the right person. Like I was going through so much at that time. I didn't want to be called a hero.
Yeah.
But it is true. Now that I'm far outside the box and really took everything in, I was like, okay, yes, it was
It was
the
heroic.
stars aligned. It was meant to
Yeah.
be. That was how it was.
You ran
supposed to
into, a
happen.
lot of us are running out of a burning building. You ran straight the fuck in.
I ran into
Straight
it. I
fuck in.
did. Yeah. So it was just interesting when I saw that. I was like, oh, I have a story to tell you. But to go back to your story and talk about, your journey. October is, of course, Breast Cancer Awareness Month.
Yes.
You have something called Behind the Pink Ribbon, and I really would love for you to tell the listeners all about that.
So I don't know when it started. I think it was a year after the year after I'd gone through breast cancer. I think it was 2020, maybe I did it. And also I think I did it in 2020 just because also we were still kind of home a lot. And Breast Cancer Awareness Month came up, and one of the things as an actor, I was like, I joke, but when I got cancer, I called my agents, and one of the things I said was like, I have cancer now, so I can go on those commercials as a true cancer person, trying to make light of it. And it was like, I got one, and I was like, oh, and I have another. Oh, and I have another. And I remember going out, like I've gone out for a number of cancer commercials, but I've booked one that didn't actually air. But like when I actually had cancer and was bald, like I was too cancery or not cancery enough. And it made me kind of mad. Because there was a point in, the breast cancer, because I was like, breast cancer awareness, there's got to be a great commercial I can get on. There was something about the pink washing of it all. And this, it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and we're aware, and we have these pink ribbons. And if you go deeper into a lot of these organizations, apparently Susan G. Komen is apparently one. Is it Komen? It might be one of them. It's that thing of like, oh, if you see a ribbon, we're going to give money. We're going to give a portion to breast cancer, and like 10% goes to breast cancer, or like just stuff like that. This utilizing this trauma that so many people go through. 1 in 8 women, or I always like to, because I never want to be inclusive or excluding people. So I'm always like 1 in every, 8 mammary having people in however they identify in the United States, if you want to go that way. But because men also get breast cancer, and, non-binary peeps don't consider themselves women, but if they have mammary glands, blah, blah.
Right.
But I decided that I was going to do 31 straight days of giving people advice of things that I knew, that I wish I knew. Because we had also done in 2020, my husband and I did a podcast called Chemo Skinny. We had written a blog during going through it. And then because we had time off and then really got a chance to sit in it, we did I think it's 12 episode podcast, literally just looking at our blog and going through it again and looking at it with, a year and a half distance from it to be like, oh, this is how we felt then. This is what we went through. This is how we felt. What do we wish we would have? What would we have told ourselves now that we know after we've gone through it? Just to kind of put it out on the world. And so in October, I basically did 31 straight days of just advice about if you have breast cancer or you're going through breast cancer, about different aspects of it that I wish that we would tell people, or I wish that I would have known, or things that I think are really helpful and simple that people don't necessarily think about until they're in it or don't even know. And so I did that 1 year, and then I reran it again the second year, I think last year. And so this year, and I kind of called it like behind a pink ribbon, what's behind, there's more than something behind a pink ribbon. I think I'm calling it more than, behind a pink ribbon. And so this year, what I wanted to do, because I've been very open about going through breast cancer over the course of the last couple years, I have had a number of people reach out to me I've had people tell me in confidence, people who have friends who are going through it and aren't sure what to do, who've I've become friends with because of just trying to answer questions or trying to pay whatever little knowledge I have forward and to, I guess, try to make people feel less alone in something that's really terrifying.
Mhm.
So this year, what I wanted to do is it's called Behind a Pink Ribbon. And so I put it like a call out on social media because I want 31 days of not just me, 31 days of different people.
Mhm.
So it's going to be me and it'll be me probably a couple of times in the 31 days, but like me, people I know, people I don't know, just from because I'm on all these groups doing a video and I'm going to be sharing them on my social media and, and amplifying them just every single day, just a piece of advice from someone who's gone through it for someone who might have to
Nice.
go through it, and I've been starting to get I'm trying to have them all before October starts, but they've made me cry. Some of them are really beautiful. They're just really touching and, heartbreaking.
Well, I mean, everyone goes through it differently. Like that, everyone's
Mhm.
story is different,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So, and of course, like, you could have gone through it one way, but someone else is going to go through it another way, and
Yeah.
someone else's story could be like, oh, well, that's something similar, and it's just you could all just say like, yeah, we all have breast cancer, but
Well, everybody,
different layer.
yeah. I mean, one of my favorite things, my two to go to is always take someone with you to the doctor's office for big appointments because your brain can't handle all the things, or at very least a tape recorder or a list of questions, especially when it's big, appointments. And there is no right way to handle it. There's only your way. There's no right way. There
Love
is
that.
only your way. It's that
That is
simple.
awesome.
It's
No.
because to put that on someone, and there's a lot of other stuff that comes along with that, but
Mhm.
it's for some reason I felt really in touch with going through breast cancer. I felt very connected to God, whatever. I was raised Catholic. I just believe in God as being love, as being a bigger energy, and connected
Mhm.
to, a higher power almost. And I think that when I was going through it, I was just really aware of that connection. But not necessarily the connection to a thing other than myself, but to my person in connection to humanity. Because I think that's what is represented overall, So I think that trying to keep building a community, keep talking about things that are hard and that, I remember my doctor we went to this class that was like, what to ask a registered nurse, everything you need to know about this, this surgery. And I brought my husband because he's a writer and he works from home and he was the only man there and he felt really weird. And there was a bunch of women there and there was a woman who had her daughter there. And one woman was a couple of years older than me was like, yeah, 9 out of the 12 people in my friend group has had breast cancer. So it just kind of feels like it's like a rite of passage. And I was like, what? And, because they say like 1 in 8 women in America. And it's been, since I was first diagnosed, it's been 5 years. And yeah, I know easily a dozen of close friends who have been diagnosed. And the thing that they never talk about is I also know a fair amount of people, myself included, that 1 out of 8 will be diagnosed. 30% of them will have metastatic. They'll either have a recurrence or it will be metastatic breast cancer. And we don't talk and that's the ellipse that needs to have more attention paid to it. Because, I'm on medication that's keeping my cancer at bay.
Mhm.
But it is something that we always like to talk when it comes to cancer again, because death, we always like to talk in binaries of like, it's done, it's over, it's this, and because we want to be done with
Right.
something. But we also have to be really aware that not everybody experiences that the same way. I didn't go through like one of the hardest things for me was having a reoccurrence and I caught it super early because I was really on top of, I'm really not aggressive. I'm very assertive, and my doctors are very good. But I'm really aware, and I think power comes from knowledge in really understanding what you went through, as opposed to being like, I went through something and I'm not thinking about it. Is, for me at least, I find my security, I guess, in knowing everything about the condition that I have or whatever. And sometimes that can be a little weird because if something like is elevated, you're like, but it also is the thing that, we found at the beginning of like a little cancer cell because my medication stopped working and we changed medications. And now I'm scanned a lot more frequently, which is also good because it's scanned that I was like, shouldn't we have been doing this before? But there is something that I witnessed in my mother because she had when her cancer represented that it's almost harder because you know what you went through. And because you feel like you failed people, because you have people who talk about you like you kicked cancer's ass. I'm like, man, I knocked him out, but then he came back, and now we're on it. Like, because
round 2 or 3, yeah,
and it's. I think that we need to have, in the same way with mental health, we need to have bigger, more open discussions about this stuff because it's really common. And the less we talk about it, I mean, it's the same with like miscarriages that, I remember talking to my brother who's a dude or whatever, but like being like, oh yeah, I know lots of women who've had miscarriages before they've gotten pregnant and carried to term. Like these things happen more than anybody talks about because women have been socialized to not talk about ever feeling bad. And that shit needs to stop. So,
right.
Anyway,
no, absolutely.
It's
oh no.
I'm like, and when it comes to all of it, because it's not just women in healthcare, it's men in mental health and being available to just be human, man, to just accept that being human is being fucking messy. Wow, that was I spun out there. Thank you for indulging me. Sorry about that.
Oh no, this is great. I love it. I mean, you're being open and raw, and that's exactly what. That's the whole thing. We're crushing the conversation, right? That's the whole point. But I'm gonna now. Typically, I don't usually get political on Crusher Convo, just to respect everyone's thing. But there's something happening in October 3rd. So
I understand the assignment.
Yes. So I wanted to just quickly talk that there's going to be this wonderful group of women called the Women of Star Trek for Kamala Harris. It is a live Zoom event with host Stacey Abrams, with guests like Jerry Ryan, Michelle Hurd, Kate Mulgrew, Nana Visitor, Terry Farrell, Denise Crosby, and of course my podcast namesake, Gates McFadden. So how exciting is it that you are a part of such an amazing event?
I feel super honored. The thing about joining this franchise, which, I walked onto the bridge and I'm like, oh my God, I get to do this. And I did not, and the work is amazing and you get to do the work, but it wasn't until the premiere that I was like, oh, wow. Not only did I get to do this work in this place with these amazing people, but now I'm part of this family, and legitimately every single person in their own way on that picture that you have is an activist for the betterment of this idea that Gene Roddenberry put out there, which is infinite diversity and infinite combinations. John Billingsley, I've been welcomed into the fold, as it were, with Trek Talks and Trektivism and, Kitty Swank, Armin's wife, who does, and who with Jonathan and John and I think Brent do, raise money for pancreatic cancer. And there's just, everyone is really involved. And I've been very fortunate to be invited in, and also just really willing to jump into a group of people who are working to make things better for everybody. And so when they said they were doing this, and I'm like, I'm included. That's amazing. They sure. I'm like, I'm always just like, yes, what can I do? My question is always is if I can, how can I help? Because that I believe that is what we're here to do, is to be of service in whatever way we can. And sometimes that service shows up in a different way for everybody.
Make sure you go to that website, womenofstartrek.com, and register for the event. So yeah, I told my friends, I was like, give me a synopsis of what's going on.
Yeah. Well, I think it'll probably, they usually, because there's a website, I'm sure it'll be like you can replay it, or I'm sure it can be replayed.
Replay it, or maybe clips.
It's a whole website. Like those ladies, like Kitty was like, we're doing this. And I was like, okay. And the next thing I know, like it was like, here it is. This is what it is. And I was like, yeah, you know.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and go into the penny for your thoughts portion of the show.
Penny for your thoughts.
I have a couple of questions from two big fan of yours. The first one is going to be from Abby from First Flight Podcast. She says, how was it working with Amanda Plummer? And how did you keep the intensity of the scene like the one on the bridge after multiple takes?
Hi, Abby. Amanda was fantastic. I think as an actor, the one thing you love to see is how other actors you admire work. And one of the things I took away from watching her work is how she was so willing to just keep it loose and keep playing. So the intensity was easy to come by, I think, because there was a sense in her as she was playing that you didn't know what was going to happen. And so you let it react off of, the individual playing the role, and she was phenomenal. Yeah, I think that it was also my last day of work. Like that was my last day of work. So you as an actor, you're like, oh God, it's the last, like you get there and you're like, it's the last day. And so I think you're almost even more invested because it's the last time you're going to be soaking it all in, It's easy it's easy to stay present because you don't want to think about the fact that you're going to leave.
Right. Did you know the ending for Tavine when you got the role?
I did not.
Okay. So
I did not know. I didn't know. I didn't even know she was just going to last that long. Like initially it was like, oh yeah, 4 episodes. And I'm like, okay. So there became a conversation because my head was already shaved. Like there became a conversation about my eyebrows. Like, do we shave the eyebrows? Do we not? And I was like, I'm only going to be in this for 4 episodes. And I mean, I don't mind being bald, but when I had cancer, like the one thing I was like, just keep the eyebrows. So I don't know if I would have rethought that because the eyebrows added like time to that whole prosthetics process. So yeah, I did not know. I hoped, I always say, I read the title of the first script, which was, the next generation. And I was like, oh shit. Like, my spidey sense was like, oh my God, they're doing a spinoff. And I was like, you're going to spin this off. Just stay alive till the end.
Yeah. I mean, that was intense. I was upset because I was like, Tavine helped Beverly, save themselves out of that, the gravity well. Right. And then when she was I was all like, oh, not her, not Tavine. We were so upset. I remember I was waking up at 1 a.m. to watch the episodes because I would watch it twice, then go get ready for work, and then come back and do a live show. So it was a long 10 weeks. And my trauma happened during Star Trek Picard. So it was a whole thing for me. Yeah. But I remember when Tavine died, I was like, this is just getting worse. I was like,
I had a lot of text messages that were like, and messages like, I threw something at the TV, and I was like, thank you. But it is that thing though. Like I did not know until we got the scripts. I didn't know until I got the scripts 7 and 8, and Terry was busy shooting, and like we ended up talking about it, but like I did not know, and we hadn't really talked about it. But I was like, all right. And at first, there's part of you as an actor that goes, it's because they don't like me. I did a bad job. And I was like, oh no, it's because they were building it this way. Like, they chose you because it mattered. It mattered, and you want to take the risk. You want to go Game of Thrones, right? You don't want to kind of, be like, hey, we're not going to do her. We're going to do someone who doesn't matter. Like if you're going for the emotional gut punch. And it was it was really, it's brave as hell of them. Makes
Yeah,
me
I mean,
mad, but
we were afraid that one of the main characters were going to die. We're like, is Picard going to die? Like, we don't know what's
yeah,
happening. So yeah, we were definitely on the edge of our seats
yeah.
during those 10 weeks. So the next question is from my friend Jay. He's helped me out with the podcast here and there on some of my episodes. And his question for you was, what were your inspirations for how you played Tavine? And did you look at other Vulcan characters?
Well, Terry was once we decided Tavine was indeed a Vulcan. And then he agreed that we could make her, because we also had a big conversation about like the bald, like, is it bald? Are there bald Vulcans? Blah, blah, blah. And I came back and I'm like, what if she's like a quarter Delton? What about that? And he was like, okay. He was like, okay. But when the fans find out, prepare to answer questions about sex. And I'm like, okay. All right then. So once we knew, I mean, when I auditioned, I thought it was a Vulcan, like that's how I played it. And then we just went there and I took that initial inspiration from Leonard Nimoy. Then once I got the job, Terry had the production secretary send me a list of all of the Vulcan heavy episodes from basically all the series to watch. I had already started back on the original series, mostly watching Leonard. And then I did a deep dive into Memory Alpha.
Mm-hmm.
So it was Memory Alpha. It was mostly Leonard Nimoy. It was mostly that. Because we had added the little bit of Delton to her, I used the Memory Alpha to figure out what the characteristics were that might be Delton, like, because everything's always like, oh, sexy Delton. I'm like, yeah, but Gene Roddenberry wrote a whole thing in Star Trek the book about how Deltons could just because they were super creative, could also, when it came to science and stuff, could like really see things.
Right.
And I liked that aspect of it as well. And so I just basically took those characteristics and dove into it. Because, my biggest thing was, was the fact that I feel like sometimes when people play Vulcan, but there tends to be a misnomer that they do not feel. And so people play them. Right. They play their stoicism as unemotional, like they're as non-emotional, and it's not that they're non-emotional, they just know how to control their emotions.
Correct.
So we did lots of meditating, because basically, like, if you look at the history of the Romulan, Vulcan split, and Surak being like, because they were such a volatile people, because this is all allegory for humankind, right? Basically, Vulcans started basically the Vulcans became Buddhists. They all started meditating and like getting control over their emotions. I'm like, oh, okay. So with that stuff, that was like, okay, where does this sit? And as somebody who is can be a very volatile human in terms of having big feelings, I was like, I know what this is. And then, because instead of being like, I don't feel things, it's the change of being like, no, I just don't feel them, to, oh, that is what I'm feeling. I'm really curious about, like, really analyzing it. And actually, instead of being away from it, fully being in it, but just being in a way that's really analytical, as opposed to like, just lets it fly,
No, that's an awesome answer. I love that. And the thing is like, I think, like you said, a lot of people forget that Vulcans do feel, and they're just in control of the emotions. I think what was different for Spock was just because he also had his human side to him, right? So he really had to try, I think, probably harder than most Vulcans, because he had to fight those emotions. But it wasn't like he didn't have them. Like we've seen those episodes where he's like, I'm in control of my emotions, and he's bawling, right? So those were just the moments. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. So real fast, guys, remember, You can find more Crusher Convo content by liking and subscribing here on YouTube. You can find me and Stephanie over at Threads and Instagram. You can buy merch over at TeePublic. Find me on your favorite app like Apple, Spotify, or Good Pods. And if you would like to support the pod, you can do so by buying me a coffee or joining Patreon. And all of this is on my website at crusherconvo.com. And my Admiral Crusher shout out goes to Engineer Mark, who is a Patreon member. So thank you, Mark, for your support. And Stephanie, thank you for joining me tonight. Do you have anything to plug or where people can find you? Like I said, Instagram,
yes,
Threads.
you know what? I'm going to plug this because I'm so in awe of people who consistently make podcasts every week. Like the one podcast we did was a capsule episode for Chemo Skinny, but I helped my husband. I was a co-producer of sorts. And we had some engineering problems because our engineer has a real job. And we did something called Package of Excellence, which is a 6-part, 3 are out so far, podcast series about the making and the remaking of Caligula the movie. It was just released. It was a famous movie from 1978. You were super too young to do this, but basically it was the most expensive porn movie ever made. It was produced by Bob Puccioni, directed by a guy named Tito Brunz, written by Gore Vidal, starring Helen Mirren, John Gielgud, Peter O'Toole, and Malcolm McDowell. It was just recut and re-released. I think you can get it on Apple, the movie itself. And they played it at Alamo Drafthouse, but the behind the scenes, like hubbub of it is insane and crazy. And I'm plugging it because you will not be bored. You will not be bored.
Oh, awesome. That sounds interesting. I'm going to definitely check that out.
Yes. I keep posting it on my Instagram, and but it's called Package of Excellence. It's on Apple. It's everywhere you can get your podcasts. But yeah, they're like half-hour episodes. And if you have a commute to work, they're fully worth it. They're fully worth it. Because the 70s were a crazy time in film.
Yes, they were. Yes, I mean, I just missed it. Like I said, I was born in 85, but you know, I had the tail end of where
there you go.
My brother was born in the 70s, so he kind of just showed me the way.
Yes. Also, if there's anybody who is a cancer haver, newly diagnosed, survivor, thriver, and you want to join in behind a pink ribbon, please hit me up on the social medias. Mostly Instagram is the easiest way to get in touch with me. And give us your video, man. We want to hear your voice.
Yeah. And her handle is right below my name there.
Yes.
Ski Says. So yeah, hit you up. Thank you so much. I totally enjoyed this chat and us talking about your journey and Star Trek and all the good things. No pun intended. So anyways, guys, thanks so much. Have a nice night. Live long and prosper. Bye.
Crusher out.